All right. And we're live. Hello. Welcome to Winterviews. My name is Catherine Silva, Cat for short. And tonight we have the amazing, the wonderful, the sometimes maniacal Todd Keisling back on the show for the second time. You were the first.
Amazing, the wonderful, the maniacal, apparently. Put that in my bio now.
As you should. You were the first repeat offender for Winterviews. So take that as you will.
Right. Yes. Happily.
We've got someone in the chat who is clearly on theme for tonight's episode.
Oh, Nikki. I love you so.
So yeah, we're chatting about retirement / elderly horror tonight.
Yes.
Which I guess can be pretty encompassing. Retirement home based stuff. I'm not super familiar with a lot of other things that have come out that might be horror based around that, but I feel like this year is the year of the retirement home horror.
Seems like it. I know Philip Percassi's got a retirement home based novel coming out later this summer.
Yeah, I saw that. And then there's also this horrifying John Lithgow movie coming out called The Rule of Jenny Penn.
I haven't heard of that. I'll have to look that
up. The trailer's pretty terrifying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is my volume high enough? Can you hear me okay?
I can definitely hear you okay.
Okay.
I think that our audience can hear you. I'm not.
Well, I don't know. Can they?
Not seeing any. Nikki is saying that she can hear us just fine. So I think we're all set there. For those that will be watching in the future, Todd, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief sort of rundown of who you are, although they should know, but you know, there's got to be a few newbies out there.
The guy who makes shit up. That's pretty much it. I'm Todd. I write horror, focusing mainly on cosmic horror, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in a minute. Twice Bram Stoker nominated, and written several novels you may have heard of: Devil's Creek, Scanlines, the Monochrome trilogy, 2 collections, one of which is Cold Black and Infinite, which came out 2 years now. It's been 2 years since Cold Black and Infinite. And I'm here to talk about my latest novel, The Sundowner's Dance, which takes place in an over 55 retirement community.
Yeah, that definitely getting some early praise from, people like Publishers Weekly, I believe, was the
Library Journal. We have
Library Journal. God, I am terrible. My memory is awful.
That's okay.
Library Journal gave it a starred review, and it's coming from the amazing Shortwave Publishing, who has released a lot of
the guy behind the curtain at Shortwave, Alan, he designed this beautiful cover. He designed the whole book, actually. I mean, the attention to detail. Look at the boards.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah. So,
that's pretty.
I'm really excited for people to read this. I'm happy to see that it is landing the right way with reviewers. People are getting what I was trying to do. So it's, a weight off my shoulders, I guess.
I mean, the book looks amazing. I can only imagine how amazing it is inside. I'm obviously a fan of your other works.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping that I'm one of the lucky few that's able to snag a copy at AuthorCon, which is coming up.
Yes, I will have about 35 copies of New Book ahead of its release date at AuthorCon. It is first come, first served. I'm not reserving them for anyone because I don't have the mental capacity to keep track of all that. So
Yeah, and that's, as it should be. The alternative is pre-ordering straight from Shortwave Publishing, which is the best alternative, because you're supporting a, basically a one-person publishing business, and Alan should get lots of love for that. And Steve is here in the comments saying, "Not if I beat you to it."
all right. I expect there to be a line on Friday night at AuthorCon. I'm just saying. There had better be a line. I'm hearing from all these folks who are going to be there. Oh, I'm going to get a copy. 35 of you will get a copy.
Yep. Okay. First come, first serve, everybody.
Yep.
Create that line. But now we get to dive inside and kind of get a sneak peek at your sort of inspirations for it and what it meant for you to write it. So I'm going to start with the obvious question. Where did your idea for the project generate from?
So I can't actually remember what, like, the overall idea. Like, I wanted to write something neighborhood focused for a while. I just didn't have the right seed. And I also wrote down on a Post-it note one day at my day job many years ago, the worms in my brain dance at nightfall. And it was just one of those throwaway lines that just popped into my head. I wrote it down. I kept the Post-it note, and actually don't know where it is at the moment. But it kind of sprang from that. At some point, the neighborhood idea became this group of people who worship the moon, which eventually changed to a meteorite.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the root of where the concept came from. The story itself is about a recent widower who has retired. He's at, in his golden years, and he's, just wants to be left alone to grieve his late wife. So he downsizes into this over 55 retirement community called Fairview Acres. And almost immediately he notices that it was a bad decision. Because Jerry is very much like myself. I put a lot of myself into Jerry's character. He just wants to be left alone. Mm-hmm. He isolates. He suffers from anxiety and depression. And when he's going through it, he kind of makes himself as small as possible and disappears. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where the character came from. He's the driving force behind the whole story, but he's up against neighbors who want him to participate in everything and, are always checking in on him to see how he's doing. And, he just wants to be alone and just sit in the dark and grieve. And what fueled a lot of this in the story was, at the time that I was working on it, my wife, Erica, found a lump on her breast, and we had to go through that whole process of getting it biopsied. And waiting to hear back from the doctor about, is it cancerous? Is it not? What can we do about it? And there's like this, it, anyone who's listening or watching who's never had to go through this, like, you have to wait, set up, you have to schedule an appointment to have scans, then you got to wait and have an appointment set up to have it biopsied, then you have to wait for the results to come in and have a follow-up appointment. It's a long span of time, or it feels like it, because at this, while you're waiting, you are wrestling with this worst case scenario, or at least I was, of, what am I going to do if this turns out to be, the C word?
Mm-hmm.
And what if it's too far along? What if it's terminal? What if it can't be treated? Or, all these things that my brain jumps to. And I was working on the book at the same time that I was going through this. And I put a lot of that emotion, a lot of that dread and fear into the story. Fortunately, Erica, her results came back. It's benign. It's, she's good. She just had her annual screening, all clear.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of where the emotional core of the book came from. And it's not just about loss. It's about growing old. It's about trying to figure out what to do with the rest of your life when your days are numbered. And it's about, how do you start over? How do you move on from something like that? And, layered on top of that is all the horror goodness and, the gooey, wormage, as I call it. It's a cosmic horror story. It's a pulp sci-fi horror story, but at its heart is a beating heart of an old man. And I hope people like it when it comes out. It's so far has been received incredibly well, better than I expected. It seems like there has been a bit of a shift toward more elderly focused horror stories, and I'm here for that. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's hard not to, I guess, you answered a lot of my questions that I was going to ask. So now I'm like,
good.
Yeah. But I was going to say, it's hard not to empathize with loss in general, and the idea of losing people who are close to you, especially because of it happening too early, or even the idea of loss because of age. It's always something that's looming. It's always something that we fear, and kind of that idea of losing your faculties, losing your ability to do things.
Yes.
Your ability to feel like you are doing something. It's all a fear that people understand, or at least a lot of people find frightening.
Yeah.
So
growing up, I mean, I was raised mostly by elderly people. My great grandmother, my granny, and my grandmother, my mamaw. And it was very much a group effort. And I don't know, I was around, granted this is in the 80s and 90s, but I was around older people, people who were, close to, who had either retired or were close to retirement age. So I was in the room for them having to deal with insurance bureaucracy or Social Security or having to do all that bullshit. And all the bureaucracy surrounding those kind of things, this kind of programs are set up intentionally, I think, to obscure how to get them. And they're doubly confusing for seniors because, they've never had to do it. And it's, they may not be familiar with, the ways to go about doing it. Like, especially nowadays with everything online.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have empathy toward, that state of being, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Especially from my upbringing and everything. And I've seen firsthand the effects of dementia. That is one of my biggest fears.
Mm-hmm.
Is the mechanism that helps us experience reality suddenly starts malfunctioning, and now you're trapped in your own head, and you're not sure if what you're seeing is a hallucination, if it's if someone is actively means you harm or not. There's dementia is absolutely the worst. And where the title comes from, there's a form of dementia called sundown syndrome or sundowning syndrome that can occur in dementia patients. And basically what happens is these symptoms get amplified at sunset.
Hmm.
So, you're talking about lack of sleep, again, magnified hallucinations, extreme paranoia,
Mm-hmm.
and, because your memory is fucked, you might get up to go get a glass of water in the middle of the night and not recognize your own house. And now you're afraid because you don't know where the hell you are and who put you here. And it's a terrifying thing. And my granny suffered from it, and my late grandmother suffered from it. And it's it I had to research a bit into it because I've only ever known what it feels like when, you know, on the outside of it, like going into my granny's, hospital room, and her not recognizing who I am. But at the same time, researching it, you put yourself on the other side, the other side of the table, and you're the person in the hospital room. A total stranger walks in and you feel like you should know them, but you don't. You don't recognize their face,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't. Now you're suddenly worried that they're there to harm you in some way, or they're here to steal something, or
Yeah.
it's awful. And I really tried to dig into that. I tried to do that justice, but also use it as a mechanism to deliver, the horror aspect. And so that's a lot of rambling, but that's kind of where my head was, and how I approached the whole writing from an elderly point of view sort of thing. I
Mm-hmm.
basically tried to imagine myself knowing what I know about, senior living and everything. Tried to imagine myself at that age. And, if I didn't have Erica in my life, what would my life look like?
Yeah.
And, how tough that would be. And basically what amounts to just, marking the calendar, waiting for the day you die. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, um, yeah, we can sometimes put ourselves in some pretty dark places in order um, to really get into our project and write. And I mean, I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't been there fairly recently with the same kind of thing with the looking into dementia.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fairly poignant part of the Deadlands series. So, and it's really easy to get lost in that I don't know, it's kind of an abyss, I guess. It's like
Yeah.
you just it just feels all encompassing. So yeah, that's scary.
Hmm.
um There were a couple of comments here that I wanted to flash up on the screen. We had one from Nikki. I read one of the early drafts and the ending made me cry, and I hate Todd for that. So there you go.
Well,
That's what you can expect.
Nikki, I'm sorry that ending hasn't changed.
And then Steve commented, holy shit, I'd move to Alaska to avoid that Sundowners escalation.
Yes.
I mean,
Except, Alaska does experience, darkness as well as sunlight, Steve.
yeah. Yeah. I think you'd just have to deal with it no matter where you were. Uh, but so how long have you been working on this one?
Let's see. I started it in, I believe it was 2018. It was after I had finished the first draft of Devil's Creek.
Okay.
And I started it. This one, it wasn't supposed to be a novel. It really wasn't. I had every intention of writing a novelette. And I set it aside, and then I tried to co-write a version of it with Chad Lutsky, but I wasn't in the right frame of mind for that at the time. So we set that aside, and then a few years later, I got invited to an anthology, Shadows Over Main Street, Volume 3, and I had this, unfinished story in my files. So I went back to it, thinking, okay, if I could trim away and just get to the root of the story and try to reshape it into like a 5,000 word piece. And I muddled with it for like a week, and I'm like, this is longer. So I had to back out of the anthology, unfortunately. But it slowly grew and grew and grew until it. And this is 2022 by this point. Kept growing, and I swore it was going to be a novella, and it was going to be. It absolutely would have been if not. There's a point in the story where a character's daughter shows up at Jerry's doorstep asking about their mother, and I didn't know. It was one of those moments in the writing process where you realize that you're just recording things that happen. Like, you have no control. The characters are going to do what they're going to do. And until that point, I was on a trajectory. I was, I could see the ending. I was heading for it. And then she showed up, and they had a conversation, and that opened up a whole other perspective. And suddenly, that's when I realized, well, shit, this is going to be a novel. Because at the time, I didn't want to write another novel. Devil's Creek really burned me out on long form fiction for a while. But I realized I need to get out of my own way. And the writing the book was a hard lesson in that respect, because I resisted it every step of the way. And the story was suffering because of it. And once I kind of, accepted, okay, this is a novel, here I had feedback from Nikki, from Anthony Rapino, Laurel Hightower gave some very valuable feedback on it after the first draft. And I was able to identify all the different places that it needed to be expanded upon. And then my agent's notes on it also helped greatly. And first draft was about 62,000 words. It was a very short novel. And by the time I implemented all the feedback and had some time to think about it and revisit it and everything, it grew by another 30K.
Okay. Yeah.
And so now after some line editing and stuff, it's down to like I think 91.
Okay.
But yeah, it feels like a very long journey to get to this point.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's my own damn fault. So it
But I
definitely made me question if I could still write a novel at certain points, because it was just, you know how it is. You get like in the middle of a book, and you can't see the forest for the trees, essentially.
yeah.
And you start to question, is this any good? Is anybody gonna fucking read this? Is this, what am I doing and why am I doing it? Essentially.
Yeah. And to be coming off of something as titanic as Devil's Creek, which I
Yes.
mean, how many that's, we're clearly into the what, 120, or
Oh,
what even
you
is
sweet
that
summer
long?
child.
Like, are
No,
we into 200 or
so the first draft of Devil's Creek was 178,000 words.
oh, Jesus.
The published draft is about 145.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge novel, and like, and an amazing novel, but a huge novel. So coming off of that and wanting to do something shorter, totally understandable. Um, at the same time, I love that you went through this journey of realizing that this thing had, uh it knew what it needed to be, and you recognized that, and so it became what it is. It's still a novel. It's not 140,000 words, and it's uh, going to be wonderful. And maybe the next thing will be a novella or a novelette.
No, the next thing is already written, and it's 125.
Okay, so clearly, then there's just no hope. For
No, I'm just doomed to be the guy who writes long horror novels. And for the average reader who wants something under 200 pages, I'm not, writing for that target market, I guess.
no, you're writing the investment novel. Is you have to invest in the Todd Keisling story, which, you know, it's easy. Guys, if you have not read Todd Keisling yet, you really should. In fact, there is a t-shirt that you can get that asks, have you read Todd Keisling? Also available at the online shop. So certainly worth grabbing along with several of his books. I'm going to switch over to cosmic horror, the question of cosmic horror,
Okay.
because it is something that you revisit in several of your works. And I'm just curious, because that was the topic of conversation when you were first on the program. We talked about cosmic horror. Did this one feel any different when you were writing it uh, in that genre? Was it did you approach it any differently, or did it feel like kind of welcoming back an old friend?
Uh, yeah. I mean, my brand of cosmic horror is a little different from a lot of the traditional sense, because I focus on the human element, you know, the human element that's lost in all this chaos. Um, I knew from the start that the book was going to be cosmic horror because, that's my jam.
Mhm.
And given what I already knew about what the big bad was in the story, it had to be cosmic horror. There was no other
Mhm.
way it was going to work without being hokey. And at the time, in the original draft, it wasn't set in the same universe as Devil's Creek, but I realized, this is an opportunity here. I wanted to tie this in and also expand my own cosmic pantheon of entities that may or may not have names.
Mhm.
And that's, as I was in the process of rewrites after my agent's notes and everything, I had a better understanding of what my own mythos was and what to call it. It's called the Southland mythos. And it traditionally is going to be stories that are set in and around Appalachia, and Poconos are an offshoot of Appalachia. So, uh, you know, it was good to, write something in that context. I think once I had that context, it was a lot of the rewrites became easier because I had a framework in mind. I understood, where to reference things. Like there's a brief mention of the events of Devil's Creek in it in passing,
Mhm.
very quick, maybe a sentence. Um, like it's tough when you're trying to world build, but also focus on this tiny little facet of the
Mhm.
world. And so you're kind of balancing focusing on the characters and their plight, and also, kind of alluding to this something bigger.
Mhm.
And I think I pulled that off with Sundowner Stance, honestly. Uh, an editor gave me grade many years ago when I was first getting started, and that was, if you ever write a sequel to anything or want to expand a universe where everything kind of exists in the same space, write whatever you're writing in a way that makes people want to search out your other work.
Mhm.
And so I think there are enough like subtle nods and not so subtle nods to, cosmic universe that I'm building that is Lovecraft adjacent.
Mhm.
I name dropped Arkham and the Necronomicon in Devil's Creek for a reason. Um, so this exists in that universe. We even pitched it as Cocoon meets The Color Out of Space.
Mhm.
Color Out of Space was a big influence on the premise of this story,
Ugh, it's
and
such a terrifying story.
some of the history that gets unearthed in the story, some of the history of the area and everything, that all has a nod to Color Out of Space. So,
Yeah. Um, Color Out of Space is probably my favorite H.P. Lovecraft short story. And it is horrifying for those who have not read it. Um, and also revolves around a meteorite, if I am not
yes,
mistaken. So,
my
um,
meteorite is very different, though.
hmm,
I will say that.
well, that's good for me because that will leave me guessing and I won't obsess and freak out over it. Um, so, yeah, and then Cocoon, obviously, that's certainly a movie that I have seen the ending of, but not the beginning of.
I mean, since we're talking about old movies, another one that was a huge influence was The Burbs, the
Oh
Tom
yeah,
Hanks comedy. from like 88 or 89. I forget how long ago that was, but there are some nods to direct and indirect to the Burbs. Jerry at one point refers to himself as a Klopek. And there is a dog named Queenie.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is always just something so frightening about the small community, the very small but uniform community. And you see horror done about HOAs and suburbs, and taking sort of that spin and doing a retirement community twist on it is kind of fun.
There was an X-Files episode that I went back and watched a couple of times actually while working on the story. It's the one where Mulder and Scully are undercover and they move into this HOA because there have been all these disappearances, and there's like the guy running the show he conducted some kind of ritual that causes this thing to come out of the earth and kill anybody who doesn't adhere to the HOA's bylaws. So if the little lamppost on the corner in front of your house, if the bulb goes out, there's a scenario where the guy's trying to like screw in the bulb in time before the thing comes out of the ground and kills him because he's panicking and can't get the bulb screwed in right and shit. So that was I got some that inspiration from that as well. Plus that's just a fun episode all around.
I have not seen a lot of X-Files, and I'm ashamed to admit that. I've seen, episodes here and there, certainly more of the first season than anything. I think there's an intimidation factor to starting a series that's 8 and some odd seasons plus movies.
It's 9 seasons, 2 movies, and then they've had like 3 recent seasons or 2 recent seasons. I forget. The recent ones aren't that good. The last 3 seasons of the original run is middling. But it's worth it if you want to invest the time. Erica and I did a rewatch of the whole 9 seasons last year. It took us like all year to get through them.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think Steve made a yeah.
Yep. The first 4 seasons, 5 tops. And that's a statement that you could say about a number of shows that have far too many seasons. So with that in mind, what were some, I guess, what are some other like elderly horror or even retirement horror, if we can, that one might be a little more nuanced, but elderly horror pieces that you think people would be into?
The first one off the top of my head, The Taking of Deborah Logan.
Oh God, somebody else brought that up.
That one, that's a really accurate portrayal of dementia. That obviously there's more than just dementia going on, but especially in like the first act of that movie, it's rough to watch because they depict it so well. Bubba Hotep takes place in a retirement home. That's a good one.
Yeah,
and I think Joe Lansdale did a great job, with that. Especially like there's the little old lady who's a kleptomaniac in the retirement home, and then there's the woman who's like think she's like in an iron lung or something in the hallway, and the klepto walks over and like takes her glasses and walks away.
God.
It's been a while since I've seen Bubba Hotep, but that does stand out in my memory.
Okay.
Stephen King's Insomnia, which I know isn't necessarily a favorite among his fans, but it was one of my first like long Stephen King novels that I ever read.
Okay.
And that is about, an elderly man who loses his wife, and he's dealing with the grief, and he can't sleep, and he starts seeing things because it's been so long since he hasn't slept. And then he meets somebody else around his age that is also experiencing the same thing. And there's a whole big thing. It's actually an integral story to The Dark Tower. If you read The Dark Tower all the way to its end, he doesn't tie it in to Insomnia until the very last book of The Dark Tower.
Okay.
Yeah. But I haven't read it, Scott. I haven't read Insomnia since I was, an early teenager. I'm thinking. I mean, Cocoon, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of a sci-fi, lighthearted comedy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, there's that famous Twilight Zone episode about kicking the can, and like the kids who go out and play kick the can are, reverted back to being children.
Mm.
And there's the one guy who doesn't want them to go out and do this and stuff. That's a really good episode. It was one of the ones that got remade in the Twilight Zone movie.
Okay.
That's all I'm coming up with at the moment.
Okay. This one is not horror, but we started watching it recently. It's the new it's a new TV series, and it stars Ted Danson, and it's by the same guy who created The Office and The Good Place. And it involves Ted Danson going undercover in a retirement community to, suss out a thief. And so it's supposed to be a comedy, and it's really serious for a comedy. It's it definitely deals with that, like how death just becomes like something that happens every more often than we would normally see it happen, for those of us not in medicine or in as a police officer or ambulance or whatever. We don't think of death until it really hits us. We don't see it very often, and it's just kind of every other day for this group of elderly people who he has to make friends with in order to fit in. And then when he loses one, then it just becomes this whole like, I wasn't supposed to get so deep into this. I wasn't supposed to really start actually being friends with these people. What am I doing? Anyway, it's a really good series, worth it to watch. If I could remember the name, I would.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's something about the man who does something. I really should have looked it up before I hit record, but
it's okay. We're just talking
here. Yeah. So related other question here. There is a thing called hagsploitation or hag horror. And it is something that arose during like the 50s and 60s, where it had like elderly or older women portrayed in ways that one wouldn't normally expect, and that kind
Okay.
of gave birth to the evil old lady uh, in horror.
Okay. That's
Um,
interesting.
and recently there has been some pushback about it. Like there was, I think it was an article for the Guardian or something like that, where somebody wrote about how uh, portraying portraying old women as evil was, you know, needed to stop. It needed to, we needed to stop treating the elderly as the manifestation of evil. And
I mean, I can agree with that. Like, you know, you can have an evil old man, but there has to be more to it than just he's evil because he's old, you know?
yeah, um, but yeah,
And
that
the same goes for, same goes for elderly women as well, you know?
yeah, um, and it brings up a whole subplot or subtopic about you know ageism and uh you know the whole beauty market for women, which then gets into things like the substance,
Yeah.
and someone had recently highlighted the substance as being a hag horror
I
film.
I I could see that. Yeah.
So that kind of, anyway, it just made me think. Um, Not that you are highlighting specifically like scary old ladies in your novel.
No, I actually had a sensitivity reader with experience working with the elderly read a
That's
draft of the
awesome.
book, um, just to make sure that I, didn't slip up and say something or describe something ageist. I mean, there's a list of trigger warnings in the back of the book.
Hmm.
For fact, does my copy have trigger warnings? Is the question. This is actually an arc that I have.
Oh, gotcha.
Uh,
Um, Steve also figured out what the name of the show was. It is A Man on the Inside. That's
okay.
the name.
Okay, so trigger warnings for, Nikki, I wasn't going to say anything, but uh, yeah, the story contains themes, scenes, and/or depictions of elder abuse, dementia, medical trauma, self-harm, mutilation, mental illness, animal death, and resurrection, death of a spouse,
Mhm.
gratuitous wormage, gaslighting, violence, and body horror.
Okay, wait. No, we're not just going to skip over gratuitous wormage. Is that what you said?
Uh-huh.
Okay. That's fabulous. I like that
I
very
mean,
much.
don't forget about the post-it note I mentioned at the beginning.
Yep. All right.
But to say
Is
any more about gratuitous wormage is a spoiler.
Yeah. Is wormage actually a word? Is
I
that
don't
just
think so.
okay? It
I
is
just, Alan asked if I wanted to include trigger warnings, and that's the list I rambled off.
so, and this is just a thought. Um, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but that's horrifying. Um, I think that gratuitous wormage needs to be a t-shirt.
Okay, I can make that happen.
That's content warning or uh something like that, but I think That's fantastic.
Gratuitous wormage. Okay.
Yeah. So do you think that you want to write anything in this genre again of the retirement?
I mean,
Or,
I wouldn't be opposed to writing from an elderly point of view again.
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't know if I would set it in another retirement community or a retirement home.
Yeah.
I can say that the book I just finished late last year, Revelation Road, does tie in with the Sundowners dance specifically
Okay.
in a particular way.
Okay. And that was one that you were describing as uh also maybe somewhat relating to Devil's Creek.
It ties in with Devil's Creek in some interesting ways. It
Okay.
exists in the same universe. I'm pitching it as the follow up to Devil's Creek, but it's not a direct sequel. It's more like a side by side.
Got it. Okay.
Um, but it kind of part of the book takes place around the same area as Devil's Creek,
Okay.
Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah. Part of the whole mythos.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And is that does that have a due date or a release date, or is that still
No, that is it's still very much a first draft. My agent is currently reading it to give me feedback, and I expect later this summer I will be revising it and hopefully trimming it down to a more reasonable word count.
awesome? Um, well, I don't have any other questions because you managed to answer quite a few of them in the first question that I asked. But does anybody in our audience have any questions for Todd about the Sundowners dance, or maybe what his favorite color is?
I forgot to
Or
show the brochure.
oh yeah, that's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got to do this for promotion. So like all the reviewer copies went out with these, and I'll be giving these out with purchases at events.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Um, and Steve is just commenting that that brochure is awesome. It is awesome. And he has a question. When writing characters, do you ever think of actors in the roles, or do you just roll off the top of your head?
Uh, Sometimes, not often. I think Revelation Road is probably the first novel where I specifically like looked for model references um, that fit what I see in my head, just so I have a better understanding of features and what they're wearing and everything, because it's a
Mhm.
little bit more important in that story.
Yeah.
But for the most part, no. I just kind of I see a blank face and it needs a name. And it isn't until I
Mm.
start listening to what it has to say and watching what it does that it really becomes a character.
Mm. Um, well, I am the complete opposite, and I always have an actor uh, Mostly for the guys, though. Weirdly, like I'm like my women characters are just kind of that, like the blank face, but they have a personality all there. But mostly I just like, yeah, I find actors pretty much immediately. The voice is really the first thing, and then the face follows, I guess.
Now, now that I think about it, I actually, this is going to be really funny or sound funny but I don't go with actors so much as I do musicians because I listen to
Oh,
music so much while I write. Like the protagonist from the Monochrome trilogy, Donovan Candle, he looks like a young David Byrne of the Talking Heads.
hmm.
Um, and there's the one of the main antagonists in Revelation Road looks like Peter Murphy, who's the singer for Bauhaus. And, he's a solo artist, but
Hmm.
um, you know, it, I'm weird and quirky like that. There isn't always a face to go with the character name, and they kind of
That's cool though.
it doesn't really come into focus until later in the story as it starts to develop.
Um, there's um, I can barely remember who the lead singer is of a band, so I love I love that that's where you've gone though for um a couple of your characters. Um I think the only character that I have had that I've modeled after a musician is Shirley Manson from Garbage, because
Nice, great choice.
Garbage is like my world. Um and yes, Steve, I am going to be at Scares. I am tabling with Amanda Headley. I'm so excited.
Yay!
Uh, and that's coming right up. That's at the end of the month. If you are in the area, if you're in the Virginia, Maryland, uh, you know, coastal nexus down there, you should pop in to AuthorCon. It's a wonderful charity event that's run by Scares That Care, and this is the fifth iteration of it.
Yes.
Um, the ticket prices and the everything goes to a great cause. It's supports three people in need every year, and it's a really fun time. A lot of wonderful people are there, so you should put it on your due list for
Yes.
end of March.
And if you can make it, you absolutely should go because I'm a guest of honor this year.
That's right. Todd has the bestowed wonderful guest of honor uh, title, and that means that you'll be like front and center in there.
Yeah, and also I should also plug Spirited Giving as well. If you make it on the day before AuthorCon starts, which is it starts on a Friday. So if you come on Thursday in evening, Spirited Giving is another charity organization that partner with Scares the Care, and there's going to be a whole bunch of events. There's going to be readings by Brian Keene and several other authors, and there's also going to be a live performance of Midnight Pals, which is a Bitter
Mm.
Corella's creation, where authors sit around a campfire telling telling tales, but they're very much caricatures of themselves. And I will be performing as myself.
I really wish I could go. No, truly, this is definitely something that if you're in the area and you're going to be there Thursday, you should get in on. I did not know that that was a separate charity. So,
I I hope I did not misspeak. I'm pretty sure it's a separate thing, but it benefits Scares That Care.
okay.
I think. I'm sure James Sabata will pop in or correct me online.
Well, in any case, if you can go, you should definitely go. I will be arriving probably too late to get in on the action for that evening. So I'll just wish the best of luck to everybody and have a great time. But for now, we are at the end of our episode. Thank you, Todd, for agreeing to do this episode on such short notice.
Of course.
And I just, always have a blast talking. And I am so much more pumped now to get the Sundowners dance. I will elbow and pull hair in order to get in that
Oh
line.
man. Just give me a heads up before you start a riot so I can at least film it. It'll be great for
Okay.
socials.
Sure. Yeah. Whatever I can do to boost my social persona as a rage goblin, I can do that. And next week we're going to have Tom Reimer on the show. And we're going to be talking about New England horror, which of course is There's a Cat. I love. It's a really amazing subgenre in horror, and I hope you all tune in then. So, thanks for joining us tonight, and we will see you later.